Hey guys, it's Ali, and in today's video we're doing a complete guide on the Canon 1DX Mark II. I've been using the camera for the last 2.5 years, 3 years maybe now, and I received a lot of questions about my personal settings on the camera, so I thought I'll put a little guide for you guys, just how I did on the GH5 maybe last year now, which a lot of people have been saying is really useful. So I thought this might be useful to some out there. Now, if you have the camera or you're planning to buy the camera, I'm assuming you are a professional or you're aspiring to be a professional. So I'm not gonna cover the basics. I'm just gonna sort of assume that you guys know that, but I'll still go through the camera body. I'll cover white balance, ISO, picture styles, video features, photo features, bracketing, things like the diopter, the eyepiece, and the GPS functions, and the memory cards. So yeah, I'll go through the things that I think are the most useful on the camera. The camera has got a lot of buttons, so yeah, let's start with the camera body straight away. To switch the camera on, you have an on and off button at the back, and you simply push that down with your thumb to switch the camera on, and you can also lock it and then push it back down again to switch it off. I personally prefer this to having like a dial at the top and some of other cameras that you might have. Now at the top here again, near your thumb, is the video and stills switch button, and it's also a start and stop button that allows you to start and stop your video if you are in video mode, and also switch to the LCD screen if you are shooting stills, and that can be really useful. So now I'm gonna go back into my stills mode. I'll start with the buttons near the buttons at the top here. We have the mode button, and this allows you to change your shooting mode from program to aperture to manual to shutter priority to bulb, and then to custom modes C1, C2 and C3. This is there as well. So I'm going to leave that on manual exposure at the moment, because that's the mode that we will use the most. So below that we have the drive and autofocus button. That allows you to change your autofocus from one shot to AI servo. I personally like to use AI servo, and that allows it to be more flexible with the autofocus. One shot is technically more accurate, but I find that AI servo works just as good, so I just tend to use that. And below that, as you can see, you can use the main dial at the bottom here. You can change your drive mode from single shooting to high speed continuous, low speed continuous, single silent shooting, which is not exactly silent, to be honest, it's still quite loud, and then also silent high speed, silent low speed, and then you also have your self timer. So you have a 10-second timer and a 2-second timer. This can be really useful if you're shooting long exposure, or if you're bracketing your shots. If we half press the shutter again to go back into the shooting mode. Now if we go back and press both the mode and the drive buttons at the same time, we go into bracketing mode, where you can choose the number of exposures that you want to have. I have it set to 5 pictures with one stop of exposure in between, and this is obviously really useful if you're trying to do HDR photography, and you do need to be on your timer for that to capture these 5 different shots. I tend to use the 2-second timer for that, and sometimes 10 seconds. I mainly use the 2 seconds timer, to be honest, to capture bracketed shots. Then below that we have our exposure compensation button. You can overexpose by 3 stops or underexpose by 3 stops with the main dial on the right hand side here. I'm just going to set that to 0. And we're good to go. On the right hand side we have the light bulb here, the 80s kind of vibe for your screen at the top. and then we also have another screen at the bottom as well, so the light comes on for both of these. And then next to that we have the white balance option, and from here you can see you can set your white balance from auto white balance to daylight, shade, cloudy, tungsten, and etc. And then obviously custom if you're not sure. I tend to use auto white balance sometimes, but most of the time I like to use manual white balance and set mine to what I think is the right one. Shade is really good when you're shooting sunsets and sunrises. I find this is the best one that that has given me the sort of the nicest colors when shooting sort of golden hour time. Next to the white balance button we have the exposure compensation button, and next to that we have the ISO button. Press that button to choose your ISO, or you can set it to auto ISO where it changes for you. I personally try to stay away from auto ISO and tend to select my ISO for my shots for both stills and video. I've found for video I generally don't go above 3200. I feel that anything above that or even that sometimes can be too noisy, depending on what you're doing. I try to have my ISO levels as low as I can. The native ISO on the 1DX Mark II is 400, so I try to shoot at 400 and sort of stay at that. Sometimes even lower than that is completely fine. At the front here we have a dial that obviously allows you to change your shutter speed, and then the dial at the back allows you to change your aperture. Okay, next we have the menu button on the left hand side, and if we press that we can go into all the menu options for the camera. So you can see your white balance, set your custom white balance, color space, picture styles, lens aberration correction, multiple exposures, and etc. And if we go back to the main start, stop, or switch button and we go into video mode, you'll see that the menu changes slightly. It's still very similar, but it does change ever so slightly because you are in video mode now. So I'm going to go back into stills mode just so that we can continue on. If we switch this off, you can see that the battery of the 1DX2 is at the back here, and to open that up you simply flick this backwards and then twist and then pull it out. It's quite a big battery, and it's one of the things that I love about this camera. It can actually last quite a while for stills and video. You know, I've shot full day shoots for video maybe on like two batteries. Yeah, most of the time I use 2, sometimes 3, because they are starting to get old and not performing as well as they used to. So under the on and off switch button we can open the memory card door by simply flicking this up and pulling it down, and that opens the door for the memory cards. And the 1DX2 takes 2 memory cards, takes a CFast card on the second slot, and it takes a CF card on the first slot. Now the CFast is obviously more expensive than CF cards, and that's the main driver for me, and I use the one from the guys at Cinegear Pro, and it's been great for shooting 4K 60p and also 4K RAW on the C200, and it's the most affordable one that I can find, and it's never really let me down. Yeah, I'll link these guys in the description. I think it's one of the great options that we have for CFast cards. So yeah, that goes back in here, and we can switch the camera back on. On the left hand side we have the ports of the camera. So you have your HDMI port and your USB port, which can also be used for tethering. And we have another tethering, sort of the old school style at the top, which can be used obviously if you have a certain structure for that. On the left hand side we have the mic port, the headphones, and your flash port. So these are good to be aware of. And then on top of that we have Wi-Fi connector port, which I've never used, but yeah, it's there if you ever need that. And then What else do we have? One of the amazing things about the 1DX2 is the ability to go into vertical mode, and having exactly the same buttons is really useful. So obviously you can just shoot landscape like this, but you can also go into a vertical mode. This is great if you're creating content for Instagram. And to switch the buttons on, you have an on and off switch. Here you can just simply switch that on. It's currently put that on off, but you can go on now, and you can use the buttons. It's good to have it on off so you don't accidentally press the dials or anything like that. So yeah, above that we have the remote controller port. This is useful for when you're doing time lapses or long exposures, long shutter speeds, and you want to release it using a remote, because unfortunately the 1DX Mark II doesn't have a built-in intervalometer. And then back again at the top, we have an autofocus on button, so you can use that to autofocus, and if you hold it down you can lock down that focus and change your position to take that shot for stills work. And next to it we have the lockdown button, and that basically locks down the settings you're using, so nothing changes when you're changing positioning of the camera. Next to that we have the autofocus point selection, and this is really useful because you can simply press that and then use the joystick near the thumb to select the exact focusing point. Let's say if you are shooting at 1.4 and you don't trust the camera LCD doing it for you, you can just use that and use the right point where you want to focus, and then it'll keep locked down that focus. And then next to the joystick, just underneath it, is a quick menu button, which works both for video and stills. This obviously allows you to access everything really quickly and use the main dial to change anything that you might want. Actually, at the bottom, before I forget, we have the playback button, and that obviously plays back your footage and stills, or allows you to play back your footage and stills. So if we see this shot, for example, I can zoom in with the magnifier next to it, and then with the dial at the front I can zoom in even more and zoom out, and press the magnifier again to come out of that zoom range. And then next to that we have the trash can, which obviously allows you to delete files on the camera. And then next to that we have the key button, which allows you to rate your images. So when you import them into Lightroom, you can filter them by the rating that you've selected in camera. And this can be useful if you're with a client and you've just finished the shoot and you want to sit down with them and go through the best ones. You can just highlight them with the key button, and then as soon as you get home you can just filter them by that and work on them. You can also use this to record voice memos, which I've never used, and also to protect images. And then as you're playing back, if you want to view the info of that specific file, you just press the info button at the top, and that tells you the shutter speed, aperture, and basically all the settings that you used for that specific picture. And then if you press it again, you can go down into the lens options, the focal length that you used, white balance, picture style, and etc. So yeah, that's really useful. Next thing I wanted to talk about is the eyepiece. If you press and hold the eyepiece, you can actually pull it out, and then underneath that you can see the diopter, and you can dial this in to get the right sort of vision for your eyes, and then you can put that back on. And on the right here we have the shutter for the eyepiece. This is used for when you're doing long exposure maybe and you don't want any light to go through maybe the sensor. It's good to just block that. So yeah. Okay guys, next we're going to talk about the video features of the 1DX Mark II. Now you probably already know that this camera can shoot 4K up to 60p and with a crop, and also 1080p 120 frames per second. So these are the kind of, I guess, highlights of the video features of this camera. It shoots really nice slow motion, to be honest. It's probably the nicest that I've seen in in all the cameras that I've used. So even I feel like it's nicer than the C200 slow motion. I rarely shoot in 4K 60p, especially for my clients, because the bitrate on the 4K 60p is quite high. It's 800 megabits per second, and you know that can be really huge files if you are doing everything on 4K 60p. I tend to mainly shoot on 1080p, 24p, and 24, and then I do 120 frames per second slow motion quite a lot as well, because it just looks really nice. It looks really good quality. Now to go into the video mode options, we can do that by either going into the quick menu button, and we can choose what video mode we wanna shoot in. You can choose 4K 60p all the way down to Full HD 24p. So I'm going to set this for the purpose of this video to Full HD 24p, and then if you want to shoot in slow motion, you want to go into the fourth menu option and then press set, and then go down to high frame rate, and then go to enable, and you can see that it says 120 frames per second is now enabled. And with that you don't get audio, but you still get your autofocus, which is great, because the Canon C200 slow motion doesn't work with the autofocus. I like to have my grid display on all the time for both video and stills. So I have the 3x3 grid display activated all the time, both for stills and video. I like to use that when I'm framing, and I find that it's really useful. And if we press the info button at the top here, we can basically remove all this information from the screen, and if we keep pressing it we can bring it all back, plus the histogram, which we can use for getting the right exposure. I also like to use the face tracking for both stills and video. I find this works the best for me. So this is just something that I just use all the time, and movie servo autofocus is always switched on. When it comes to picture styles, I think Canon have one of the nicest sort of color science out there at the moment, and for some time, to be fair. I personally like to shoot in mainly faithful profile picture or neutral. My faithful, I like to bring down my sharpness all the way down to 0, and my contrast down to -3, and I leave the rest as it is. And the same for my neutral profile. I like to bring down my sharpness to -0, and then my contrast to -3 as well. And I found that to give me sort of the nicest color to work with, and if I want to add more contrast in post, I can do that. The second page of the menu option gives you the option to choose whether you want to shoot in RAW or JPEG. I mainly shoot RAW. I never really shoot JPEG. I just shoot RAW and just like to have that on, but you can shoot RAW and JPEG at the same time, or just RAW, or RAW and JPEG, and you can choose different file sizes for that. You can have it the largest at 20 megapixels, or lower if you want. If you want, you can do that as well. In terms of autofocus, like I said, I like to have my face tracking on, and I also like to choose the Case 1 versatile multi-purpose setting. I've found that to work the best for me. And I like to, and then if we go down to the fourth page, I like to have all points of autofocusing selected, and I found that to give me the best results for autofocus. And to be honest, the face tracking is so good on the 1DX Mark II that I never really, and the C200, which is what I'm filming this with at the moment, that I never really have to change these settings, and I probably haven't touched them in a very long time. Another feature that I think is really important is the LCD brightness, because if you are shooting outside, it can be a bit too dark to view everything through your LCD, but you can change the brightness all the way up to 7, or even bring it down if you feel like it's too bright, maybe you're in a theater or something like that. So yeah, that's just another good feature to be aware of. And then next thing I wanted to talk about is the video system. You can change the video system from NTSC to PAL by hitting the menu option and going to the wrench option, and we go to the fourth page. and you can see that it has a video system option, and we can change that from NTSC to PAL. PAL if you want to shoot 50p or 25p, and NTSC allows you to shoot 24p up to 60p. So yeah, that's just again something to be aware of. Down here we can see the GPS settings, and with that you can choose either mode 1 or 2. Mode 1 is when the camera is always active in terms of GPS tracking, and the second one is the GPS is switched off when the camera is switched off. This is useful if you're doing a lot of stills work and you want to see what you've been shooting exactly on the map in Lightroom. This is a great option, but it does use a bit of battery, and I'd really never have it on. I don't feel the need to use it as such. When it comes to bracketing and stills mode, like I said, you can go into the bracketing mode by pressing these two buttons at the same time, the mode and the drive buttons. And you can also choose the number of bracketed shots. You can do up to 7. I personally like to do 5. I think that's just enough to get as much information as possible. And I feel that has worked the best for me. And then you can also change the exposure increments from a third all the way to a stop, and then half a stop. I like to have mine on a third of a stop in terms of exposure compensation, and the same with ISO. You can change it from a third of a stop to a stop. As soon as you get the camera, you'll find that the beep when you're like autofocusing for stills is switched on, and you can switch that off by going to the third menu option, and you can see that you have it at the bottom here, and you can just select disable, and you can select that off. And image preview, I have it on hold because usually I like to have my image just stay there for as long as I want it to stay there, and then if I half press the shutter again, I can go back into shooting mode. So yeah guys, that's about it for the guide and sort of my personal preferences. If you have any questions, put them in the comments down below, and as always, stay creative, and I'll see you guys in the next one.